In the first chapter of the book, God commands an angel to read aloud to Moses the contents of celestial tablets, which document biblical history spanning 50 Jubilees, that is, periods of 49 years.
Most people grow up believing they know what's inside the Bible, but there are ancient books you've never heard of, texts so disturbing and so controversial that Western Christianity forced them out of the scripture. They give unsettling and precise details of concepts that challenge everything we've been taught. Yet, while these writings were destroyed across Europe, monks deep in Ethiopia hid them and kept copying them, preserving truths the rest of the world was never meant to see. The Ethiopian Bible. Most people believe the Bible is a finished collection of sacred writings whose boundaries were decided long ago, translated into modern languages, printed by the millions, and passed down until every version was near perfect. But there's a deeply unsettling part of its history that's incomplete. Because preserved inside the traditions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church exists a biblical canon unlike any other still in use today. A living scripture that has been continuously read, copied and guarded for nearly 17 centuries. While Protestant Bibles contain 66 books and Catholic editions recognize 73, Ethiopia's canon contains 81. 81 separate works that together form the oldest complete Christian biblical collection still actively practiced anywhere on earth. These extra scriptures are remnants of early Christianity that were only preserved because Ethiopia never took part in the theological purges that reshaped Europe. But if Ethiopia preserved 81 books, what exactly did the rest of the world lose? These texts are written in Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language that no longer exists in everyday speech. Every Ethiopian manuscript, therefore, isn't just another religious writing, it's a linguistic relic, a historical record, and a spiritual artifact all at once. Each page carries the imprint of monks who spent years hunched over parchment by candlelight, copying each line with unmatched precision, believing they were safeguarding something far larger than themselves. These scriptures were often embellished with gold leaf, symbolic geometry, and vibrant pigments. Completing a single manuscript could take years. In fact, many of these texts remain locked inside remote monasteries, carved into cliffs or hidden in mountain valleys, protected by isolation, rituals, and an unbroken chain of devotion. This makes Ethiopia a living archive of early Christianity. While other regions suppressed certain books of the Bible for the secrets they held, Ethiopia kept them all. And it all began during the height of the Axumite Empire.
We must destroy the Roman Empire, or we must destroy Jews who cooperate with the Roman Empire.
Around 330 to 340 years of the Common Era, Ezana of Axum, ruler of the powerful city of Axum, officially converted to Christianity, making Ethiopia one of the first nations in recorded history to adopt the religion at a state level. His conversion is traditionally attributed to Frumentius, a Syrian Christian who rose to become Ezana's advisor and later the first bishop of Axum. Under Frumentius's guidance, churches were built, leaders were trained, and the scripture was translated. Archaeology confirms this early transformation. Near Axum, researchers uncovered what is considered the oldest known Christian basilica in sub-Saharan Africa, dating to the 4th century, physical proof that Ethiopia embraced Christianity almost simultaneously with Rome itself. Yet, from that moment forward, the two civilizations began to drift apart. In the Roman world, Christianity soon became intertwined with imperial authority, especially after Constantine the Great adopted the faith. Councils such as the First Council of Nicaea were convened to enforce doctrinal unity, but this meant that any extreme distinct translation was suppressed. It didn't stop there. Texts deemed too inconvenient were also excluded. Theology became inseparable from political power, and the entire religion was reshaped to serve the empire. However, Ethiopia followed a very different path. Rather than leaving the fate of Christianity in the hands of a few, they decided to weave Jewish traditions into worship. This included dietary laws, circumcision, and Sabbath observance. Soon enough, the people's spiritual customs blended naturally with Christian theology. Monastic life became central to society,
with all the trappings of Greek or Roman city life,
shaping education, philosophy, and governance. But even after eliminating the problem that changed Christianity in Rome, Ethiopia still faced a deeply disturbing problem. As Islamic expansion reshaped North Africa and the Middle East, Ethiopia became geographically isolated from the rest of Christendom. It was cut off from Europe, removed from later theological councils, and forced to evolve independently. Two civilizations embraced the same faith, yet only one carried its complete memory forward. And buried inside that memory is an ancient manuscript so controversial it was condemned beyond Ethiopia's borders, quietly erased from Western tradition, and ordered destroyed. The Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is one of the most important ancient religious texts ever written. It predates Christianity. It shaped early Jewish belief. It directly influenced the New Testament. And yet today, most people have never heard of it, and there's a disturbing reason why. The book is traditionally attributed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, a man mentioned briefly in Genesis. The Bible gives him only a few lines, but there's something deeply unsettling about those lines. They say Enoch walked with God, and then he was taken. There is no record of his death, no record of his burial. Most readers assumed this meant Enoch was carried alive into heaven, and soon enough, that assumption became the foundation for an entire body of writing. According to tradition, Enoch was shown hidden knowledge about creation, angels, time, and judgment. He was taken through heaven and earth. He was shown what happens after death. He was taught how the universe operates, and he was commanded to write everything down. Scholars date the composition of the Book of Enoch between the 3rd century before the Common Era and the 1st century of the Common Era. This places it centuries before the New Testament was finalized. Fragments of the text were later discovered in Aramaic and Greek, including pieces among the Dead Sea Scrolls. But those fragments were incomplete. Only one full version survived. That version exists in Ge'ez and was preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, which included Enoch in its canon of 81 books. Ethiopian monks copied the manuscript by hand for centuries, storing it in monasteries carved into rock and hidden in mountain regions. While other Christian traditions removed the Book of Enoch from their Bibles and condemned it, Ethiopia never did. Because of that decision, the entire book still exists today, and what it contains is deeply unsettling. The opening chapters describe angels known as Watchers descending to earth. These beings take human wives and begin teaching forbidden knowledge. They introduce warfare, weapons, astrology, and magic. Their children become giants called the Nephilim, violent creatures who destroy everything around them. According to Enoch, this corruption spreads until humanity itself begins to collapse. According to Enoch, eventually, God intervenes. The fallen angels were bound and imprisoned. The giants were destroyed. Enoch is then shown visions of heaven and places of punishment. He describes bright chambers reserved for the righteous and dark regions prepared for those who corrupted the world. These passages form one of the earliest written accounts of judgment after death. The book then introduces a figure called the Son of Man. This being is described as a divine judge who will one day return to restore justice. He sits on a throne of glory. He separates the faithful from the wicked. He brings punishment to the corrupt and reward to the righteous. These descriptions closely resemble later portrayals of Jesus in the New Testament.
Jesus goes into the Galilean hillside. He takes about 5,000 people with him.
Early Christians recognized this immediately because they were already familiar with these ideas. Enoch also contains detailed explanations of time and the heavens. The text outlines solar and lunar calendars and describes angels controlling the movement of celestial bodies. Ancient readers believed the universe followed a sacred order, and the Book of Enoch presents this system as knowledge revealed directly from heaven. Another section of the book presents dream visions in which human history is retold through symbols. In this unsettling part of the book, nations appear as animals. Leaders are portrayed as birds and beasts. The story moves from Adam through Israel's struggles and into future conflict. It is history told through coded imagery, blending prophecy with memory. The final chapters of the book focus on moral instruction. They warn against violence and corruption. They promise resurrection for the righteous. They describe final judgment and the restoration of the world. Many Bible scholars believe a direct passage from Enoch is quoted in the New Testament, in the letter of Jude. This confirms that early Christian writers treated this book as authoritative. Yet, over time, Western churches removed the book and pressured other churches under their influence to do the same. The scripture was standardized. Canons were narrowed. Texts that were believed to be dangerous were quietly excluded. Only Ethiopia did not follow that process, and when the monks sensed what could happen if the Western churches found out, the manuscripts were guarded inside remote monasteries and passed across generations by hand. Western scholars did not encounter the complete Book of Enoch again until the 18th century, when Ethiopian manuscripts finally reached Europe. By that point, the book had been absent from Western Christianity for more than 1,000 years. A foundational text of early belief had been sitting in plain sight inside Ethiopia while the rest of the world moved on without it. And Enoch is only the beginning, because preserved beside it in Ethiopia's canon is another ancient book that rewrites early biblical history and reshapes the story of creation itself. The Book of Jubilees. The contents of the Book of Jubilees are perhaps even more unsettling than those of Enoch. It's a carefully organized scripture that lays out the account of the creation, law, and human destiny with unsettling precision. And just like the Book of Enoch, it survived in full only because Ethiopia refused to let it disappear. Jubilees was written in Hebrew sometime between the 2nd and 1st centuries before the Common Era, during a tense period in Jewish history when identity, tradition, and divine law were under threat from outside influence. But whoever wrote this book was not simply retelling familiar stories. He completely rebuilt them. Genesis and parts of Exodus are rewritten in a strict chronological system based on cycles of 49 years, called Jubilees. Every major event is placed into this framework. Births, covenants, migrations, and commandments are all carefully timed. Jubilees adds details that do not exist in Genesis. Adam and Eve's daughters are named. Noah's life is expanded. Abraham's choices are explained in greater depth. Jacob's family is carefully traced. Moses is shown receiving divine knowledge directly from angels, not only the commandments we know, but also explanations about creation, calendars, and the future of humanity. In this book, angels are not distant figures. They act as messengers, record keepers, and teachers. They deliver revelation. They explain history. In fact, they reinforce the idea that everything unfolding on earth follows a heavenly plan. One of the Book of Jubilees' strongest, yet controversial messages is the divine law. The book insists that God's commandments did not begin at Mount Sinai. According to Jubilees, the patriarchs were already keeping the law generations earlier. They observed sacred festivals. They followed purity rules. They honored God's calendar. This suggests that Moses did not introduce divine order. He only revealed what already existed. The Book of Jubilees also places enormous importance on the calendar. It argues for a strict 364-day solar system, fiercely rejects lunar timekeeping. According to the text, using the wrong calendar leads to misplaced holy days, broken covenants, and spiritual collapse. Sacred time must follow heaven's design, or humanity drifts away from God's order. The book repeatedly warns about purity and separation. It urges Israel not to mix with surrounding nations. It emphasizes lineage. It portrays Israel as chosen from the very beginning, with its destiny already written into the fabric of history. Nothing in the Book of Jubilees is accidental. Even suffering follows a pattern. Blessings come from obedience. Punishment follows rebellion. The book believes that history is already predetermined and unfolds exactly as heaven intended. Modern scholars finally confirmed the authenticity of Jubilees' ancient roots when fragments were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The Dead Sea Scrolls are usually thought to have been produced by a group known as the Essenes.
These pieces prove the book originated in Jewish tradition and was widely read long before even Christianity existed. But those fragments were incomplete, and only the version preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church still exists. But if these books were once respected, copied, and trusted, why were they gradually pushed aside by the West? What exactly made writings about angels, divine calendars, and predestined history too dangerous to keep? Because the real mystery is not that Ethiopia preserved these books. It's why everyone else stopped. And once you understand that, you begin to see that their disappearance was not accidental at all. Why these books were hidden. The first problem church leaders faced with the Book of Enoch was authorship. Although tradition attributed the book to Enoch himself, scholars and early church fathers began to doubt that a figure who lived before the flood could have physically written the text. This placed Enoch into a category known as pseudepigrapha, writings believed to be falsely attributed to ancient figures. As Christianity became more structured, texts with uncertain origins were viewed with growing suspicion, especially when leaders were trying to present a clean and unified body of scripture. But authorship alone was not enough to explain why this book was suppressed. The very ideas and theology contained in the book left the early church leaders with deep unease. The Book of Enoch speaks openly about fallen angels, demonic influence, and the origins of evil through celestial rebellion. It describes the Nephilim as real beings and presents detailed visions of heaven, hell, and divine punishment. Even more troubling for church authorities was its description of a Son of Man who would eventually return, a divine judge whose role closely mirrored later Christian descriptions of Christ. This created a serious problem for the leaders. The book's version of these ideas was completely outside the church's control, and its language risked blurring theological boundaries at a time when Christianity was still defining itself. The book's apocalyptic tone also made it more concerning. It contains graphic visions of judgment, cosmic upheaval, and the destruction of the wicked. There were detailed and deeply disturbing accounts of future catastrophe. Church leaders wanted to be able to control any approach to end times teaching. They wanted stability, not widespread fear driven by vivid apocalyptic imagery. Enoch's dramatic visions were seen as unpredictable and potentially dangerous for growing congregations. And as Christianity became institutionalized, councils were convened to decide which texts would be considered authoritative. That's when the First Council of Nicaea and later regional meetings, like the Council of Laodicea, worked towards standardizing doctrine and scripture. Only books that had broad acceptance across major Christian centers were included. The Book of Enoch never achieved that level of agreement, particularly in Rome and Constantinople. Without universal backing, it was gradually excluded from official lists. Its association with fringe religious groups made matters worse. Early sects, including Gnostic communities and Jewish groups such as the Essenes, believed Enoch was a sacred man. They held him in the utmost high regard. For mainstream church leaders, this raised red flags. They believed this could lead to the spread of heresies, and Enoch's popularity among these groups made it harder for church authorities to defend its place in the canon. Eventually, outside Ethiopia, the Book of Enoch simply stopped being copied. Without strong transmission networks in Latin or Greek, the manuscripts eventually disappeared. Only fragments survived, including pieces later discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Book of Jubilees also suffered a different fate, although for slightly different reasons. Its first major reason why it was removed was because of its concept of time. Jubilees' insistence on a strict 364-day solar calendar strongly rejects lunar systems. This directly clashed with the calendars already being used in Jerusalem and later in Rome. Accepting the Book of Jubilees would have required restructuring religious festivals and sacred observances across the Christian world. This would have led to serious disruptions, a risk the church leaders were not willing to take. Another reason why it was abandoned was its portrayal of divine law. Because the book portrays that the patriarchs of faith were already obeying Mosaic law centuries long before Moses, the church leaders found it harder to justify its authenticity. At the same time, Roman Christianity began emphasizing faith and grace over strict legal observance. Jubilees' heavy focus on law was viewed as undermining that message, making it theologically uncomfortable for church authorities trying to separate Christianity from Judaism. The book's strong emphasis on ethnic separation further complicated matters. It repeatedly warns against intermarriage and insists on Israel's spiritual exclusivity. Early Christianity, by contrast, was expanding rapidly among Gentiles and promoting a universal message of salvation. The insistence on lineage and separation by the Book of Jubilees conflicted directly with that mission, making it appear divisive in a religion seeking global reach. Like the Book of Enoch, Jubilees was also closely associated with sectarian communities. The Qumran group, widely believed to be Essenes, valued the book highly. Because these communities were considered fringe by both mainstream Judaism and Christianity, their favored texts were viewed with suspicion. Jubilees inherited that stigma. There was also a practical argument. Since the Book of Jubilees largely retells Genesis and Exodus, church leaders thought it was unnecessary. Rather than preserving an expanded version of stories already present in Scripture, they chose to prioritize the original books. And once again, if the books were not transmitted, they could not survive. The Book of Jubilees had limited circulation in Greek and Latin. Without strong copying traditions, its last manuscripts vanished. While Western Christianity narrowed its canon and moved forward without these texts, Ethiopian monks continued copying both Enoch and Jubilees in Ge'ez, preserving versions of sacred history that the rest of the world quietly abandoned. These books were not removed because they lacked meaning. They were removed because they carried too much of it, because they spoke too clearly about angels, divine order, sacred time, and predestined history. Do you think the contents of the books of Enoch and Jubilees are real? Drop your answers in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.